This video, I'll be covering posts from r/detrans, a well-moderated subreddit for people questioning, desisting, or detransitioning. Now on to the first post, titled, "Why did I do this to my body?" This is by someone who is socially trans but regrets their medical transition. Dysphoria with body hair shouldn't be treated with such a bad chemical. The problems with my genitals should have been worked on, but I thought mutilating it was the right thing to do. How did all this happen in such a short time? Now there's no turning back. From the comments, a detransitioned male comments, "It is insanely fast. I think people figure they have more time. It's hard to imagine how quick it all happens. They don't really tell you about that. They make it seem the other way around." Now, someone who questioned a while but did not end up transitioning comments on this. "Yeah, that's true. I notice. Does it happen fast? All I remember is people's E or T voice updates, hair updates, etc. They always talked about how long it's taking for their voice to drop. How long breast growth is taking. I get that one more, I guess. How they feel impatient with the slow process." Now the same detransition male comments. "Took a month for me to have small breasts and enlarged nipples to the point that the speed of it caused nerve damage. Anyone who says it's slow should speak for themselves and stop misleading others." And the person who questioned but didn't end up transitioning replies to that, "WTF. I didn't even know that was possible. And to be honest, I've read around trans spaces for like 5 years. I am so sorry, and yeah, they need to stop effing misleading people." Now on to the next post, titled, "What does the community mean when they say first grade biology knowledge?" This is by someone who's desisted. "It's a common trans activist insult towards anyone that disagrees. But I never really knew any evidence or further knowledge besides the metaphysical claim that gender is a spectrum. What is this advanced knowledge that is claimed?" So one person who's questioning their own gender transition comments on this, "It's BS. I have a PhD in biology. I am yet to be shown any evidence for gender being a thing at all, and that a male body can have a non-male gender." Someone who's socially trans but regrets their medical transition comments, "Sadly, they're essentially imposing that you're unintelligent for somehow not swallowing every unfounded claim that they use to keep people swept up in their own self-serving ideology. The great irony is that most of these people have, intentionally, low understandings of, only seek disingenuous or complete dismissals of reliable and responsibly peer-reviewed studies are out there that show that transition is absolutely nothing closer to what it's purported to be. Real advanced knowledge would lead most of them to yet another existential crisis, because facing reality and finding happiness within themselves takes much more effort and dedication than they're willing to put in to find true inner acceptance. My best to you. Now, someone who's detrans and female comments, "It means they can't understand one sentence in this summary thread, let alone research it. Let alone the research it compiles." Now, the link will be in the description, but I will be reading through this Twitter thread since the data in it is actually quite useful. "It means they think biological sex is the basis of identity and character, and therefore requires people to conform to stereotypes. They're sex essentialists. They think the only way people can be individuals is if the reality of sex can be invalidated." Now, the Twitter transcript mentioned starts with, "Do trans people show sex atypical brains? many people suggest that trans people have brains more in line with their desired gender, and this causes feelings of gender incongruence. However, if we take a closer look, we see some important underlying issues. In a famous study, the authors compared prepubertal and adolescent children, then suggest sex atypical cerebral differentiation occurs within these individuals. Article in the description. The authors found sex atypical differences in the adolescent cohort, when majority of the cohort is homosexual. Homosexuality equals 23% of trans boys plus 44% of trans girls in prepubertal children, which is the left image. I'll show you. And homosexuality is 100% of trans boys and 78% of trans girls who are adolescent, which are shocking stats for a study and definitely make things put into question. This is the left image. So you can see with pubertal children, there are quite a few of them. But in the right image, which is right here, you'll see that 100% of the trans boys in this demographic were gynophilic, meaning they were attracted to women, so they were originally women and they're attracted with women. And 78% of trans girls are androphilic. This is astounding. And also looking at the numbers of people in these studies, they aren't that big either. The only non-sex typical finding which was specific to gender dysphoria was in visual network 1, VN1, via fMRI. It was suggested that alterations in this network may disrupt body perception in GD, gender dysphoric individuals. In another study by some of the same authors, they tested whether transgender people with GD would have sex-atypical hypothalamic activation to androstenedione, a steroid hormone in human sweat that causes sex-specific olfactory responses. But similar to the previous study, sexual orientation was not accounted for. And especially in this type of situation, since those are sex-specific in a sexual way, since those are used kind of like pheromones in animals where different sexes attract each other, this is very likely to be different in homosexual versus heterosexual people. Why is this important? Well, the same-sex atypical hypothalamic response is observed in homosexual men, link in the description, and homosexual women, link in the description. It's becoming increasingly clear that the only people with any sort of sex-atypical cerebral differentiation occurs in homosexual individuals on average. This is further supported by functional connectivity studies sex-atypical amygdala covariance. Link in the description. You can see this here. Notice the high similarity in amygdala activity at rest between heterosexual females and homosexual males and vice versa. You can see right here. Interestingly, in an effort to bring all of this together, Savick et al. 2011 examined the brains of heterosexual transgender people in order to control for sexual orientation. Link in the description. The authors found sexual dimorphism in various gray matter parameters in control male and females. However, these findings were not found in the heterosexual transgender population. You can see right here. Please pause if you want to look in depth into these images. So rather than sex atypical brain structure / function, what is specific to GD itself? It's been shown that individuals with GD show weaker structural and functional connectivity within the default mode network, DMN, of the brain, which is vital for body perception / image and self-referential processing. Link in the description. Findings which have been replicated here, link in the description, and here, link in the description. The DMN consists of cerebral midline structures, including the medial prefrontal cortex, MPFC, and the posterior cingulate cortex, PCC. Interestingly, it's been shown that trans individuals with GD show a stronger activation pattern within these DMN structures when viewing pictures of their body morphed into the opposite sex. Link in the description. And you can see the results here. Now, it's important to know that correlation is not causation. Just because we observe a different pattern in GD subjects compared to neurotypical controls doesn't suggest it's innate, born with, or a product of postnatal experience. We simply don't know. Also, going back here with the different reaction when shown an image of themselves in the sex they prefer, that type of reaction is, in my view, something that might be just because of, conformity with one's own ideas of themselves. So that can be explained by that or various other things like the various comorbidities here. As said here, also transgender people tend to have lots of comorbidities from depression, anxiety, anorexia, autism, and a homosexual orientation. All of this needs to be considered when looking at neuroscience studies on this population. For an overview on molecular hypothalamic differences in relation to homosexuality and gender dysphoria, see thread here. And the link to that thread is in the description, but I won't be reading that right now. So continuing with the comment thread. But how can one be sex essentialist while claiming sex can be changed? This is by a desisted person. And a desisted male replies, they want people to change their sex to match their personality, rather than letting people accept their personality regardless of sex. Now a detrans and female person comments, they believe sex is a constraint on individuality. They believe that a person's sex determines their identity and personality. That's sex essentialism. However, they want liberation, at least for themselves. Therefore, they want to establish that some people aren't constrained by sex, because they are special cases, exceptions in the middle of a sex spectrum, or people whose brain types are displaced along the spectrum from the genital types. Most people, of course, have to conform to being cisgender and provide the foil for the exceptional ones. In this belief system, people are born at one point of the sex spectrum and remain there all their lives, excluding gender fluid, the most exceptional of the exceptional. Only the trivial aspects of sex can be shifted along the spectrum, and that's a work of hormones and surgeries, and affects the conformation of the body. The deep determinative factor in one's sex status that is gender, and it's an innate and inalterable brain map. That is, F this, life is short, go for a walk. TLDR, they don't really think you can change sex, not in any fundamental way. They think they can reveal your true inner sex through surgery and hormones. They think that crude reconstructions of genitals are sufficient because the form of a penis or vagina is the essence of a penis or vagina, and function is non-essential. To them, these body parts have their primary value as signifiers of the true brain sex. That's a big thing. Them is not all trans-identified or transition people. Them refers to people who recite party lines like first-grade biology knowledge. Now a desisted female also replies, yeah, that's one of the biggies I also cannot get past. Somehow everything is fluid except your brain, which is fixed. Like all around, it's the complete opposite of what we know about the notoriously impressive plasticity of the brain and mammals' procreation being fixed in a binary system for hundreds of millions of years. Also, apparently gender and sex is so enormously diffuse and complex that no one should even think to understand it. But then we can also transform you from one to the other just like that. Well, our desisted male comments, a lot of it is either a misunderstanding of intersex conditions or relying on the idea of sexed brains, which has been debunked. And the desisted male comments, it's the typical insult that's become so universal within a certain super circle of society. Degrade your intelligence. They resort to insulting your character because they know they're wrong. And the desisted male also says, this is a different one, all three of them. I don't know. I was so effed in the head when I was thinking of transitioning that I thought I had a vagina inside of me all along, and surgeons only had to dig it out. In retrospect, that wasn't very rational of me. Next post, titled, Accepting My Manhood and the Fact That I'm Non-Binary. This is by a desisted male. I'm a gay biological male that has struggled with feeling out of place from a very young age. In hindsight, due to autism that went undiagnosed until very recently. One area in which I always felt out of place was my inability to meet masculine gender roles to others' satisfaction. A huge chunk of my childhood was spent being bullied and belittled by boys my age for having personality traits that were deemed too effeminate, gay, or weird. Honestly, I was never that effeminate, but I could never perform masculinity as well as my hyper-masculine bullies. I think this experience did a number on my conception of gender identity from a young age. On top of this, many adult male role models in my life growing up were cold, condescending, and unloving, including my father. So I came to the false conclusion that to be a man meant being a cold, heartless jerk. I distanced myself from the men and boys in my life and started seeking out female and non-binary friends online, who, in my experience, were so much more empathetic and loving. I started doing small things like painting my nails in secret to explore gender nonconformity. I started to get the nagging suspicion that I wasn't a man myself because I wasn't at all that masculine and got along so much better with people who aren't men. A few years ago, I bit the bullet and announced to all my online friends that I was non-binary and would be going by a gender-neutral name and they-them pronouns from now on. It felt warm and validating at first. I felt I could more freely express myself around my non-binary friends now that they knew I was one of them. However, my recent autism diagnosis made me realize that I was never experiencing gender dysphoria. Rather, I was experiencing a more generalized sense of social alienation and being different, commonly experienced by many people with autism. I started experimenting with they, he pronouns and identifying as a male-aligned non-binary person. It felt good for a while, but now it's starting to feel like an elaborate way of kicking the can down the road. After all that confusion, I've come to the begrudging conclusion that I'm in fact a cisgender man, albeit one with a strained and conflicted relationship with my manhood. Using the phrase man to refer to myself is difficult, but it feels necessary for me to move forward with my life. Lord knows I would never have worked up the guts to start identifying as non-binary in real life, regardless. So what's the point of continuing to pretend to be anything other than a man? The main problem going forwards is how I break this revelation to my friends. I would feel deeply embarrassed admitting that I'm a cis man after spending so long identifying as non-binary and immersing myself in online non-binary culture. I'm concerned that my friends may think of me as a liar for turning out to be a cis man after all. I'm concerned that I've damaged the reputation of trans and non-binary people in the general sense. Part of me wants to start all over again in a new online social circle using a masculine name and he/him pronouns, where no one ever has to know I had a non-binary phase. Where do I go from here? Now on to the next post, titled, I wonder if I'm becoming transphobic, and I don't like it. This is by a desisted female. Great part of my social circle is really into queer community and woke ideology. I was like that too, not even a year ago, but I started to feel uncomfortable. I don't even know exactly why. I felt uncomfortable with my friends, trans women, who seemed to identify femininity with dresses, makeup, and so on, especially with things she was saying. For example, we have a female friend who's not into this kind of girly stuff and has always preferred boys' company. That trans woman was telling things like, I'm only waiting for X to come out as trans, while X just feel comfortable with being non-conforming women. I started to feel uncomfortable with trans kids' parents' behavior in my country. Like, my child prefers cars over dolls, so I'm taking them to gender clinic, and people can like whatever they want despite of their gender. Uh, sorry. So I'm taking them to gender clinic, and I'm going to raise them as a trans person. I know that transition is about deeper issues, and people can like what they want despite of their gender identity. But I was constantly seeing this kind of behavior. It also started to be uncomfortable with non I also started to be uncomfortable with non-binaryism. For me, feeling feminine slash masculine isn't that important. I feel like it's too much noise about it. And person doesn't needn't feel something specific related to gender to just be themselves and act, dress, and like whatever they want. I no longer understood why people are cutting their breasts because they're agender and don't feel feminine. It all arose when I stopped identifying as trans myself. I realized that all my dysphoria is created by people around me and their beliefs. My autism causing constant feeling of alienation and something's not being right. And my endometriosis causing constant pain related to my womanhood. Of course, I was thinking about all of it before, but I still wasn't feeling comfortable with the possibility of being gender nonconforming women. And then I just realized that learning to accept my body is possible. I did it. And I also realized that I don't need any specific label as genderqueer to be myself. My sex is only one of my physical traits, and it isn't putting me into any gender labels. Of course, I don't want to hurt anyone. I use the preferred pronouns for everyone. I try to respect everyone's identity. But living in this woke world is hard for me. Of course, I know that even in the world less focused on sticking to gender norms, will be some people feeling awful with their bodies and needing transition. And it's not up to me to judge who is truly trans, but I can't stop the feeling that too many people are transitioning because of the simplified understanding of gender, manhood, and womanhood. The biggest problem with me becoming transphobic is my relationship. During my woke era, I started to date a person who identified as non-binary. Then she came out as a trans woman, and now she's about to start medical transition. But I can't stop the feeling that she shouldn't do it. I know that my thoughts are toxic, that she's an adult and can make her own decisions, and I'm trying to be as supportive as I can, but it's overwhelming for me. I also know that my learning to like my body once again doesn't mean it'll work in her case. Maybe she needs transition, but I'm still thinking about the fact that I gave up my transition just in the right moment. Otherwise, I would feel so uncomfortable with body changed by testosterone. I want all the best for her. She's the most loving and caring person I've ever met, and I'm feeling so bad about not respecting her decision in all mind levels. She's autistic like me, she's also depressed and has other mental health issues. She wasn't experiencing gender dysphoria in her youth, she also developed it in our social circle. Our relationship is in crisis and has some serious problems, but I can't stand the thought that the main reason for me to pushing her away is her want to transition. I feel like a bad person, a effing transphobe. Maybe it's time to say goodbye, but I don't want her to know that one of the main reasons for our collapse is me neglecting her identity. It will hurt her so much. She doesn't deserve it. Everything was just simpler when I believed in gender identity, understood in a woke way, and haven't questioned all of it so much. I don't know why I'm writing all of this. Now I'm crying. Thanks for reading. If it matters, I'm 19 years old and bisexual, and my girl is 21 years old and pansexual. Now from the comments. A desisted female says, I really relate to this. I too got caught up in this world and also got out before making any medical decisions. Partly because I grew out of it as a social phase, and partly because after my mental health improved. I was able to see more clearly that I had been motivated not by true gender dysphoria, but by other problems, and was just grasping for a diagnosis, a community, and a reason to believe that I was persecuted to explain my unhappiness. Now I, like you, struggle with beliefs that are unspeakable. I know I'm not transphobic, but when I see comments I agree with get absolutely ripped on Twitter and accounts banned, and I hear my friends call people TERFs and scum for publicly sharing thoughtful opinions that don't actually promote any kind of hate. So I know I have to stay silent or I'll lose my friends, many of whom still identify as trans or non binary. I often feel very alone and confused, and I feel cowardly for not speaking up for what I believe is true. That some people are getting damaged in this fight, but I'm also scared that I'm wrong and constantly questioning my sanity because I've always been so progressive and I just don't understand how everyone I know could be so wrong about this when they're so very sure. And if I dip my toes into the GC waters, there's some real right-wing nut jobs and also some who probably started out as an ally but have just lost their humanity along the way and now just laugh at trans people. It's very isolating. So even though I'm sorry that you two are struggling, I'm glad to read your thoughts and see that there's someone else in the same boat as me saying, "This is crazy. But I'm not a transphobe. Am I? What's going on?" Now, the next comment is from someone who's detransitioned. "I don't think you're transphobic at all. A lot of trans ideology is about putting people in more boxes and sexist. If a woman is strong and successful, she must be a man. I lived with a trans woman for years who believed in stereotypes. It was like being in the 1950s. Continue to be a kind person and you'll be okay. It's not hateful to not believe in the ideology." A desisted female replies, "Questioning stuff is normal and good. You should never feel like a bad person for questioning an ideology, even one like this. I think your friend sounds misogynistic." Now, a desisted male comments, "You feel like a bad person for considering what might be best for a friend? This isn't a bad thing. Blindly affirming anything a friend does without hesitation is far worse. A true friend can accept criticism or conflicting advice. Remember that the concept of transphobia is completely subjective. Simply pointing out that there's a difference between male and female bodies is considered transphobia, despite being totally true. It's a label used to try and discredit whatever information or idea the trans community doesn't like, to shut down debate and critical thought. The entire concept of detransitioners is transphobic to some people. Don't let the label stop you. You're no one's therapist. You're not their personal validation dispenser." And someone who's questioning their own gender transition says, "I'm intersex male, assigned male at birth. I was suspended from r/intersex for voicing a lack of support for sexual transitions. It's not that I want to restrict people, but I think it's not that different from other plastic surgeries. The source is an inner desire/need, and technology offers an answer. Can't I doubt it's an answer that leads to a healthy body/mind? I don't think it's anything for me to judge as wrong, but I do think it's okay for me to consider it not wise. It's like it's only okay to have this opinion if you're MAGA or something. Friend, your thoughts aren't toxic, and you aren't a transphobe. There's something unwell with the situation when questioning it is out of bounds. On to the next post, titled Race and Social Perception. This is by a detransitioned female. "Some of us had our self-esteem damaged by racial bullying when we were much younger, which led to deep insecurity. For myself, I remember thinking I would be so much more attractive as a man, since my genetics are Western Asian or Middle Eastern. European Americans perceive Arabs, Persians, etc. features as masculine, since we have stronger features in general, which really sucks if you're female. I was told my eyebrows are bushy, eyes are weirdly big, and people couldn't tell if I was a boy or a girl unless I wore form-fitting clothing, just because they weren't used to seeing my ethnic features on a woman. At the same time, they thought I was white and didn't believe me when I said I'm Middle Eastern. They expect us all to be dark skinned out of ignorance. I experienced racial bullying by the same people who claim to hate racism. I've been told I have white privilege. I've also been told that the country my grandparents are from should be carpet bombed. Told I look weird, but Zayn from One Direction is so handsome. Since I was so young when this was happening, after being exposed through social media to the idea that people can change the social presentation of their sex, why wouldn't I? I can go from an ugly woman to an attractive man overnight. Then, over the course of a few years, the beauty standards changed. All of a sudden, my features are considered beautiful. The feature I was bullied mercilessly for, now those same white women are tattooing above their eyes. My nose isn't weird anymore, it's embraced. Women are tanning their skin to look light olive like mine. Before transitioning, I was an ugly woman. After detransitioning, I'm considered a beautiful woman. All because the racism has changed flavors. TLDR, beauty standards are nothing but racism. The only beauty standard consistent across cultures are facial symmetry, health, youth, and waist to hip ratio. Everything else is noise. I would also like to add that there are actually cultures that, value value women and men that are wider in their waists. So it's not always consistent even in that aspect. Remember that. There'll always be someone that'll find you attractive, and there'll always be a path forward. From the comments, this is by the transition male. I have this, and it's a complete opposite for me. I'm half Chinese and half Tunisian. Pre-puberty, I had softer facial features and looked a lot more like my mother, who's Chinese. During puberty, I started to masculine and started looking more Arab. For example, bigger nose, my hair went from dead straight to real curly, my skin darkened. Oh well. And now today's last post, titled Crazy Thinking. This is by the transitioned male. When I was going on consults for bottom surgery, I literally thought to myself, this has no use to me anyways, so why not just get rid of it? From the comments, from someone questioning their own gender transition, that's what one would think, but you could still regret getting SRS even if your D has no use to you. Think about it. You're literally changing the most sensitive part of you in a way that things are going to function down there. It's not going to be the same. It's always going to want to close up, and you'll probably have other issues such as depth and smell. A lot of trans women I know that have this surgery have these problems, and a lot of them regret SRS. Sex reassignment surgery. And the detransitioned female replies, in a similar vein, I had no plans to breastfeed, but dealing with the reality of nipple grafts, scarring, and nerve damage shatters the image of a mastectomy as a casual body mod. Female to males treat it like it's stretching your ears or getting a tattoo. Someone who's detrans comments, see, this is the one thing I don't get. Why I was so flippant about my breasts. A detransitioned female comments, yeah, I used to think the same about my pee, too. Sometimes I still do. Then I got into a relationship with someone who was actually willing to explore my needs instead of just mindlessly shoving his parts in me. I'm starting to realize there's a lot about myself I didn't understand before, that I would have never gotten the chance to understand had I gotten bottom surgery. And someone who questioned a while but didn't end up transitioning says, take away the sexualness maybe? It's just another organ that helps your body function pain-free conveniently. You need to pee, and I've heard very bad stories of people not being able to pee properly after bottom surgery. Like extreme pain, more surgeries, and even last resort needing a permanent catheter. Those effing suck. I would absolutely not want that the rest of my life. That is more of an inconvenience than feeling like I have no use for down below. And we come to the end of today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to see more, please like, subscribe, and if you comment, my videos will get more engagement in the algorithm. Thank you so much again, and have a good day.